Welcome to Exploring the Role of AI in Education and the Workplace.
We're two classroom teachers on a mission to make artificial intelligence less intimidating and more inspiring to educators everywhere.
Whether you're just curious about what AI can do, or you're already experimenting with it in your classroom, this podcast is your space to explore, to learn, and to grow.
Each episode features a two-part format. First, we sit down with industry experts to unpack a key aspect of AI, from infrastructure and ethics to creativity and integration.
Then we bring it back to the classroom with a boots on the ground segment, real conversations with educators who are actively using AI with students.
We'll bring you practical insights, honest dialogue, and real-world examples to help you think critically and creatively about the role of AI in teaching and learning.
I'm Georgia Terlahi, a former K-5 instructional coach and an educator who's passionate about tech integration and sparking curiosity with students.
And I'm Jessica Pack, a middle school teacher, education author, and former California Teacher of the Year. My passion is creating compelling learning experiences.
So let's dive in and discover how AI can empower educators and transform classrooms, one episode at a time.
Today, we are so glad to have some incredible guests here to talk about understanding AI-driven educational technologies. We are joined by Dr. Kelly Keena, Jennifer Womble, and Amanda Nugent. Thank you so much, all of you, for your time and expertise. To begin, could you please briefly introduce yourself and explain the context in which you work?
Sure. So I have been doing instructional coaching and some independent consulting recently. I also have the opportunity to be on the board of our ISTE affiliate, Actum, and co-chair our conference committee and support a bunch of the professional learning that happens for educators there. But before all of that, I have had the chance to teach and coach and dorm parent and be a dean. And I worked at the state level in Maine and had the opportunity to facilitate professional learning all across the state around technology integration, and then have recently had the chance to coach schools all across the country on everything from strategic planning to shifting grading systems to changing the culture of schools and connecting more with families and community partners.
Thank you. That's great. Jennifer, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, absolutely. I currently serve as the chair of FETC, the Future of Education Technology Conference, and our mission is we bring together about 10,000 administrators and teachers every year to do professional development around educational technology to improve teaching and learning. Before that, I spent 18 years in a school district teaching very similar, everything from in an inner city school all the way through an AP program. So lots of experience at the district, but then for the last 15 years, I've been at FETC. We also own District Administration Magazine. So we are keeping it's about 6,000 administrators around the country informed every single day on what's happening and kind of keeping a pulse of what the direction is across the country for education.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. It's great to have this conversation. I'm Kelly Keena. I have the privilege of leading the Institute for Research Experiences and Education, which is part of UL Research Institutes. Our team creates resources and programs for educators all around safety science and all based on the research that we do in our organization. So around digital safety, fire safety, chemical toxicology, electrochemical, and materials. And then we also have a research arm. So we're doing primary research. And we recently did a study with educators to find out their digital safety perceptions. So trying to understand attitudes, beliefs, and ways in which educators who are on the ground today are working around this concept of digital safety.
So to begin with, and we'll start with you, Jen, from your perspective, what do you think is the most meaningful way AI is changing how people can actually learn, not just content, how content is delivered, but how actually learning happens?
So it's actually a really interesting question, and there's a lot of different facets to that. I think one of the things that we need to consider first is a delineation between what is ed tech and what is commercial tech. So we've got to be really clear in our intention that there are products that are designed for education systems that are research, backed with brain science and with the cognition abilities and pedagogically designed to really do the best for students and help them be productive. Then there are products on the market that are commercial products that are not designed for education and not age appropriate in any way, shape, or form. So when we're really talking about artificial intelligence, we've got to delineate between the tools that are designed for classrooms and the tools that really aren't. And I think that that's number one, a major thing we've got to teach teachers because just like we're not using TikTok in the classroom, we are using, a different reading tools in the classroom. There's a really clear delineation. It's not okay to use commercial AI products in a classroom that are not safe for children and privacy, but there are some designed programs and products that are good to use. So I think just having this conversation as a whole is really important. We all know the algorithms are bad and the addictive properties of some technologies that are not appropriate. So this has created a really great conversation among educators, and I'll have to say administrators too, in kind of getting an update on what learning is. It's made us question what is learning. Was learning a memorization of our rote facts, or is learning being able to use the information that we have to analyze and synthesize and all the things we want our students to be able to do as they adapt to the future. So I think that conversation is one big piece of it. We're definitely seeing lots of the criticisms around being dependent on one tool or another. But just like people were too dependent on a dictionary and too dependent on the internet and too dependent, those kind of cognition arguments can happen regardless of the tool. But what we really, I'm hoping, is that as people are more educated about what AI actually is, getting a little more computer science foundation, that hopefully we're having better conversations about how to critically think, how to be skeptical of information, how to really identify false information and true information, and that what we're really doing with students is teaching them a skill of what AI is, but then also teaching them the critical thinking pieces that go along with that to be able to use it the best they can in the future.
The big thing for me is that learning is shifting to this like iterative co-creation of understanding that students are engaged in. I think, you know, if I had an analogy, it's almost like they're sculptors, right? Like I think they might put in a question or a prompt, and then their job is to then respond with more context or questions that help clarify. And I think then that means that as educators, when we're looking at learning, we're not really looking at just that final product. We're really interested in the process students went through, and that evidence of learning will be in that process more than I think it'll be in the final product in this age of AI. And I also think that students will have more agency with their learning in the sense that they can bring their ideas to life pretty quickly without necessarily getting stuck with some of the foundational skills that maybe have held students back. So I think about, I was just talking with an educator who has their students creating apps. There were some students who it was just really hard to learn the language of coding, right? And now with different AI tools that have like this coding canvas, the student can actually describe their idea and then the tool creates a prototype of the app. And then the student can go back and forth and say, well, actually, I really wanted it to do this or that. And then the conversation the teacher often has with students now is like, okay, let's open it up. Let's look at the code. How might you go see what's happening here and how might you edit it? So I think learning, again, it's that like iteration piece that I think is coming up so much now. And for years, we've talked about like, how do you help students build resilience or how do you help students have more agency? And I think AI is like moving us there through this idea that learning is iterative. We're going to value the process more than we're going to value the final product when we look for evidence of learning.
Yeah, I think of myself and when I was an undergraduate student. Actually, as a child growing up in Colorado, my dad was always making sure that I knew where spaces and places where I was. So street names and directions and neighborhoods and all of the things he named them as we went through. And I think about that sense of space and place. And then I think about getting prepared to go for a 3-month backpacking trip in Southern Africa and spending a year studying maps and really looking at where I was going. And then, I'm sad to say that even last year I arrived in Singapore and I just pulled out my phone and hit locate and saw where I was going. So the ease and convenience in which I think we get to do things is a huge gift. And also, I think there's these conveniences in modern day life that give us opportunities for learning. So finding our places without having someone tell us, looking at the satellite imagery, turning my tracker on. So, watching on the map as we're going to make sure that as a single woman riding in a new country, I was going where I said to go. So I use myself as an example in this because my research actually doesn't ground me in AI and the benefits of AI. My research is in children's connection to nature originally. So I really wrestled with this. And I think when I think about mapping and Google Maps, that really grounds it for me to say that AI is this massive thing. And we have to narrow it down and understand which parts of AI are beneficial for learning and which parts of AI are beneficial for life. And then we have to understand the intersection of that and safety.
Well, thank you for sharing the story about Google Maps. I think that does a good job highlighting the concept of personalized learning and having, just a personal purpose, but then also personalized strategies for how you're going to handle a challenging situation. What does it look like, in your opinion, when AI is working well in terms of personalized learning? And where do you think maybe it's being a little bit oversold?
Well, I think about learning in formal spaces and informal spaces or non-formal spaces. Individualized learning, I think we have innately when we're children, walking around full of wonder and awe and asking a lot of questions in that inquiry. And now we have a tool in most of our pockets that provides an opportunity to understand what we're looking at, what our questions are, or, sitting at trivia and trying to figure out a question. I think in individualized learning, there's always ways that we can differentiate and think about how students can follow their own line of curiosity and their own line of inquiry. This is really critical for all instruction. I think inquiry and keeping that why and keeping that wonder at the beginning of an experience or to spark an experience in learning is really critical. I think for me, it's thinking about as AI creates these flows of information, like massive flows of information, I also think about who's saying it, where are they pulling it, how do we think about how to challenge it, how do we understand if it's real, how do we understand if it's fake. There's a lot of opportunities in that create critical thinking. So when used in that way, it's a great muscle to develop over time. It's when not used in that way that I start to get a pit in my stomach.
Of course, we would love for personalization to be the ultimate goal. That's been our dream for EdTech since before we've been having conversations about AI. The reality is that what AI is really can do and what it can't do is it's pattern seekers. So it can enable teachers to find patterns of students who have similar likes and dislikes and have similar scores. It can help with grouping people together. It can definitely help pick personalize their activities. However, it is still the human in the loop, the teacher, who really has to use, their judgment and integrity on how to use that information. We have not gotten to the step of where we're doing a really good job of training teachers to build context tools and to build gyms that can actually do some of the deep, heavy lifting of agencies. And eventually may get there. I mean, that's definitely the promise, but there's a lot of steps that we need to train teachers in order to be training their own agents in order to actually personalize every piece of information. And, there's a lot of conversations going around about different tools that can actually look at every single thing that the students are typing or saying, right? And things that are not. But if you think about your experience in the classroom, how often did you read every single piece of paper that was in your classroom? Kids are taking notes, kids are doing drafts, kids are doing things, but how are we monitoring what's happening? How are we looking at that work and then creating agency for those students because they can then do, different assignments that meet their needs and that personalize to them. I think the greatest gift that we're going to see is with special needs students. We definitely have a lot of personalization that we can do in meeting the needs of multiple different types of learners. At this point, it is definitely the biggest selling point on any show floor. I can say we had 600 companies and probably 200 or more promising personalized learning. But when you actually have teachers with 200 kids a day and they're doing multiple content and multiple projects, what does that actually look like? We're still getting there. It's just the products, there's nothing on the market that's really there yet. A teacher could customize some agents, customize some gems. We're getting there. And that's definitely the prize, but we're not quite there yet. I hope there's a day where we don't even have to say AI or personalized. It's just built into our curriculum because that would be a dreamy classroom. But for now, we're taking baby steps that direction. And we have to be careful with the memory that we want, AI agents to remember about students and their privacy. So we have to be really careful with some of these. I think what we're seeing, if I had to call one out, would maybe be Khan Academy, where it's actually taking your SAT, PSAT scores and then giving you personalized feedback and practice to match where the gaps are in your knowledge. So that form of personalization is effective, and we see that happening with a lot of products that are helping fill gaps with knowledge. But for day-to-day consistent personalization, we're still just not quite there yet.
Yeah, I think I've had the opportunity to work with lots of teachers on universal design for learning, and many of them buy into it. They're absolutely like, yes, this framework would help my students, but when it comes time for them to actually implement it and they've got, 60, 70, 80 students and 20 of them are in front of them at the same time, I think the desire to do so is outweighed by the reality of like how might we actually pull that off. And I think what I am most hopeful about, and what did you say?
Good. I mean, I was trained in UDL too. It's just hard to do. I mean, it's amazing, but it's tough to do with a big class. It's
It is
tough.
tough. Yeah. But where I'm seeing a ton of hope as I'm working with teachers right now is I think that they are able to take some of those principles and now with some of the tools, especially like Notebook LM to name one, you know, for me, UDL, the strength of the framework is being able to meet students' interests or have a different modality, right? And Notebook LM has come leaps and bounds, right? So students can upload the content or teachers can create a notebook, right? But then they can actually now say, like, actually, I would learn better if it was a podcast. They can pause that podcast and the co-hosts of it will let them jump into the conversation, ask a question. They'll also redirect the student if they're like way off topic, right? And I think more and more like teachers wanted that ability to have personalization and now I think we're getting close. It's definitely not perfect. I think there's room to grow for sure, but I think where it's oversold with some of these like to the point of intelligent tutors or is when it becomes less about like different pathways and more about like pacing. Like, oh, I noticed the student got this first grade on this quiz. I'm going to do more of this content. When really what we know is sometimes students don't need more of a thing. They need somebody to help them understand where the misconception is and they need a strategy to work through that misconception. I don't know that AI can can truly do that at this point. It's actually really hard for teachers to come up with formative assessments that uncover misconceptions. And I think that human element is still necessary and will always, to some extent, be necessary. And so I have hope that we will move closer to this space of like, can it be about pathways instead of about this like pacing or like more of X, Y, or Z. But I am real about the limitations of the technology right now.
You bring up some good points, which kind of leads to my next question. Like, how are AI powered tools like adaptive platforms, intelligent tutors, how are they shifting the roles of teachers and trainers? And then are we augmenting humans, or are we quietly redesigning the job, the actual job of teaching?
I I don't think we are augmenting the job, but we are drastically changing the job in ways that we haven't understood yet and won't understand for potentially 2 generations from now. I mean, we really don't know the impact of what is being presented to students as information, as uh, resources, and what they're going to do with that, because the jobs they are going to have don't exist yet. So it's really hard to tell, but I know for what it's doing to education and the job of teaching is changing radically from the idea that we aren't needing to teach as many memorization of facts, and it's not the recall that it used to be. But it's more critical now to have a human in the room. And the experts around AI will say this. They'll say, even with agentic AI, they'll always say there has to be a human in the space, from the developers to the testers to the software, all of it. So in education, we can't forget that, which makes the teacher and the community around the teacher really critical. In fact, when we did the study, so we did a study of teachers' perceptions or educators' perceptions of digital safety. And we did virtual 1-hour focus groups with 50 participants. And then we did an online survey with about almost 800 participants. And one of the things that they said is they need an ecosystem around them to support them in this different approach that they have now. That it has to be the administrators, the families, the IT department, facilities, everybody around them. And I think that so the use of these tools of AI and large language models and all of these tools that we have just have to be given to students through educators who understand them and administrators who understand them and feel confident and competent, and also everyone around them, including policymakers. There's no general there's no general approach to these tools in our schools across the country. Everyone's doing it differently. And so it becomes almost a bigger obstacle to teaching than it was before we had these sorts of tools. It's a risk, right? We kind of live in that paradox, I think.
AI really gives us more data on learners than we've had before. How should educators and employers kind of balance data-informed decisions with human judgment? What would that look like?
I will say this data is really powerful for district leaders as well as teachers in the classroom and employers, like you mentioned. The fact that we can take large, you know, lots of containers of data, once we get them to all talk to each other, and it can really give some insights into what's happening. We're seeing that happen with absenteeism across the country. When we dig into the data to try to understand why we have students who are absent, we can look at, a lot of different factors. I saw a multimodal display of actually a county in California doing this research around Oakland, and what they started to find out is that their lower literacy rates match their high missing attendance rates, which also match poor air quality, which also match areas with, without medical care. So there was a lot of different layers to the things that we might need to support students with. So we can take the data that we're getting from students, whether it's about their living or their health or their test scores, and we can start to really look and create a prescription for how do we better help and support students. So I think from the district level, that's really exciting. We can also look at the data about let's look at our technology. What are we using? What are we not using? What are we getting the most efficacy out of? I'm really excited to see a lot of outcomes-based contracting happening in ed tech. So if the outcomes are there, we're going to keep using it. But if we're not seeing student outcomes increase, we won't keep using that product. So we're helping administrators make better decisions. I would be remiss to say if in the classroom, I wish I would have had some of these tools, because you can very quickly analyze what students understand, what they don't understand. Filling in those gaps could be so much easier. Creating groups, knowing what people missed, assigning things. I mean, there's so many things that once teachers learn how to enable their own agents, they can take care of so many pieces of their puzzle. And probably most importantly, giving instantaneous feedback. If you can, for example, in gyms, create a rubric and identify students and outcomes of your expectations from writing assignments, and have them scored really quickly, cursory, and giving feedback more often and frequent, we know students make better gains. So there's a lot of tools that could really help, the data of this, but the key ingredient is the humans have to be trained on how to use it. The humans at the end of the day have to be the ones making the decision. There always has to be a human in the loop. And we have to really look at the data as a way of helping improve and engage the other humans that are there, not just for data's sake, I think.
I absolutely agree. Um, I think for me, as I was listening to you, it the thing that I try to distinguish for people is the data is going to help you get to the what. What is happening here? What's the pattern? You know, what do we see? But humans need to get to the why, right? Like the data might trigger you to go have a conversation or to follow up with a family or to maybe talk with some of your colleagues and see if that pattern happens in their classrooms. But you, the human, have to go uncover the why. And then it's your job to figure out what you're gonna what you're gonna do with that why. But AI can help you again. So to your point about humans in the loop, like if you uncover a why that you're like, I'm not really sure, like what's best practice with this, I think AI can do some deep research for you. They can tell you what other people have found to be successful. But then again, the human has to make the ultimate decision based on the context that they're in. I think I have some caution around employers or schools that use the data to measure productivity or frequency of things. I just, I go back to in assessment design at the state level or nationally, what gets measured gets done, right? Or gets prioritized. I think that's a similar thing with data collection tools with AI. If you're measuring frequency or if you're measuring productivity things, right? Like some of the stuff that's coming out now, like eye tracking or like keystroke logs or things like that. I think the hazard is then we're telling students like they'll almost find ways to like cheat that system, right? Because it's not really a human driven learning metric that's going to help them grow. And so I think that we've got to make sure that yes, we want the data because it's going to give us insight into what's happening and we want humans to then be able to uncover why. But I think we even need to back it up and say, like, what data do we really want these AI tools to collect? Because the fact that we're collecting it and students know or employees know is actually going to change their behavior. And maybe it's going to change it in a way that we didn't want in the first place. And I just think some deep attention to, because people will know what data is being collected. Whereas I think maybe before AI, people weren't as aware of what all the data was that was necessarily being collected. Now people know, and I think it can change behavior.
Jill Kastek is at the, now I always have to think carefully so I don't make everybody in Arizona mad at me, but University of Arizona, U of A. And she's at the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Sociocultural Studies. And so one of her bodies of work is looking at student data and what is done with that. So particularly in free software, nothing's free. And so the free comes with this exchange for student data. And then are they collecting the appropriate amount of student data? Where are they storing the student data? What are they doing and who are they selling it to? Reading terms and conditions, super critical. I raise my hand, but it's usually I'm like, agree. But they know that about us and our human conditions. So there's really data, there's this idea that is driving the free software for these things that the districts really need to understand. And it can't just be the IT department. It has to be the districts, the superintendent, the teachers, and not making teachers responsible for student data and what's done with that. That's typically picked up by these things.
I 100% agree. The transparency between, IT teachers, admin, I do think needs to be a lot there just needs to be a lot more synthesis. I mean, our experience has been, everyone they were all in like separate silos and never the twain shall meet except, when people poke their head up to ask questions. So I think that's an important thing to think about. What's one common mistake you think institutions or companies make when implementing AI learning tools?
I think it's that everybody knows what AI is. I think it's that I think it's based on assumptions. I think it's the assumption that they're safe for children and youth, the assumption that they are being understood by teachers to implement them without a good amount of training. So, you know, generalists needing to understand this on top of one more thing. So it doesn't remove anything from what they have to do. Now they have to understand more. Um, I think those are the assumptions are the risk there in terms of implementation. And then the other thing I think that institutions and or companies, particularly around that student data piece, is again, from their perspective, data for what use? For, data for data's sake is just information. It's just it's noise. And so where are they planning on putting that resource and how are they planning on using that? That needs to be right up front in these conversations.
We've had a lot of conversations over the past few episodes about helping students view AI as a thought partner, a collaborator, but not a replacement. How can education systems and employers kind of work together to make sure that students don't just become AI users, but they really understand how it works and how to collaborate with it as opposed to just offloading the thinking?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think um, one of the first findings we had very early on in the study that we did was AI is happening to teachers, not with them. So teachers are in their classrooms doing the daily work. They're really overburdened right now. I've been out of the classroom for 11 years, and I talk to my colleagues who are still there, and I talk to all of our stakeholders and our networks through the institutes. And I can't, it's unfathomable to me how much demand is on them. And then there's one more thing. And so we have to decide as a society what it is. There are perceptions of AI in every community, and they may be really good and they may be terrible, or they may just be misinformed. A colleague was telling me the other day in a family chat that they kept talking about AI, and an older member of the family chimed in and said, "Why are we talking about Allen Iverson?" So when we think about the average understanding of AI, it's very small. So I think there's a lot of strides to be made there in just defining it and just saying what it is. I just recently did our technical leadership development program, which was led by the Sloan Executive Business School at MIT. And honestly, I didn't know what AI really was until I went through a week-long training with them to say what all of the pieces are. And at the end, I'm with a lot of executives from our organizations, and at the end, even the person leading the program said, "Are we applying AI to everything just to apply it, or is there an actual use case? Like, what are we? AI is just the tool." And it's sort of like STEM. When STEM came out as a thing in the late 90s. I remember the conversations in schooling around this and the conversations around technology. And when I was designing curriculum, I would see the T as URLs to websites, right? It's like, I mean, well, isn't it the tool? Like it's the tool to understand things and the tool to build solutions. And I think AI is just the next evolution of that.
Well, and speaking of evolution, I realize we're not psychics, but just like in your own thinking, if looking ahead like a year or two, what do you think will feel normal in learning and development because of AI that feels experimental today?
Oh, wow. Um, well, in a few years, iteration is going to happen a lot. So there could be some capabilities that we right now in this conversation don't even know that will exist, right? So prediction is really hard in this market. I will say one of the things that I see a lot of district and school leaders thinking about is what problem are we solving for? Why are we adding AI to our curriculum? Why do we even need this tool, right? And so what's really interesting is helping, they're getting software. They all came back to school this fall and they opened up Microsoft and it had Copilot, and they opened up Google and it had Gemini, and they opened up Canva and they opened up all the things on their desktop, and they had little AI components to it. But they have to say, when I'm using this, what problem am I solving for? What is this going to make better? Is this really going to improve a student's learning in some way? So I think the fact that we're having deeper conversations about learning is really important. Some of the things we've mentioned today, assessment has got to have some major conversations and be restructured, because a multiple choice assessment is not a true measure when we're using, AI tools. We need to have some serious conversations about curriculum alignment. We need to have some curriculum conversations about process. We've talked about how do we even assess process and not just product. So, I mean, some of the things we've mentioned today are kind of like the starburst that we want to kind of tackle to move forward. I'm very optimistic that AI will be a powerful tool, but we also have to create some mindsets for our teachers around adopting technology, when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate, what they should be using. We've got to give a lot of knowledge and training about student data privacy. There's a lot of steps in the process that I would hope in 2 years we'll just see a flood of training and a flood of understanding and a flood of support for teachers who are doing this work. Because right now we're asking teachers to do something they've never done before. We're asking them to teach in new ways. We're asking them to use products they've never used before. This is a very big lift and a very big ask. So they need that support and encouragement. So I'm really hoping that in the next couple of years, they feel comfortable to play maybe alongside with their students as their students are learning as well. But I really hope one of the things here in Florida, 1 out of every 22 students has a parent incarcerated. So who's at home helping them with their reading when it's reading log night? Who's the person at home helping them with their math or social studies or anything that they're trying to work on? We've got an issue where students need support 24/7. Could AI provide some of these supports out of the classroom? Certainly. We're hearing some trends now about bringing flipped classroom back, but in the class is our human time. It's our collaboration time. It's our group problem solving time. But then out of school is the time we work with our device and our AI to do the research and to do some creation. So we might see a shift in the model of how we really preserve our in-class time and make that our really human-centered one-on-one time, our face-to-face time, which I hope would be even more powerful as a result. And that out of school time, we empower students with skills that then they can use these AI tools to create, to produce, to research, and then bring that back in kind of a different cycle than we've seen before. But I really think we need to really support and encourage our educators in this process. And it might take us a couple of years to get there. Being fair, there's 3 million teachers in America, right? But they teach 100% of all students. So we really need those steps to be taken, and some tough conversations around assessment and grading and competency-based learning. There's a lot of steps in the process. So I admire the schools that are taking this slowly and really deliberately and having intention. But at the end of the day, they need a district or a school leader that will role model what it looks like to use effective technology that will really help their parents and students really succeed.
You know, It's funny. I like to look back to look forward, and I think about some of the other things that seemed really big at the time, like 3D printing or virtual reality that these days, you know, sort of, okay. Um, but I think about if I pick the example of 3D printing, at first educators were like, okay, everyone's going to make a bubble wand, right? We're going to show you how to use Tinkercad or whatever to drag a shape on, right? It was very much like teacher driven, right? But now, if you look at how, at least in Maine or New England, how 3D printing rolls out, to Jennifer's point, it is very much like, what's the problem the students are trying to solve, right? Like, what, what, like my tractor is missing a piece, right, up in rural Maine. How might I use a scanner and then 3D print one to help have um, a, a thing that was maybe unable to be obtained in the market, right? Or it might be as simple as like in a classroom, a door won't stay open. They 3D printed this doorstop, right? Like little kids are doing this. And I think that model of like it used to be really teacher driven and there were all these directions and they all followed a template has fallen away, right? Students have the agency to see a change that they want to make in the world and then they have a tool to go do it. I think AI is going to come to be like that and it's going to feel normal to teachers. They're going to trust that students have enough guardrails around this AI tool to help guide their learning or help be a partner for them. And and then students will be able to do things like, make their own app or, use it for deep research or model conversations that could be happening between two people in history, whatever it may be that right now we think is like so outside of the box, it's really not going to be. And I also think that we will find ways in the future for people to be empathetic with that tool. Like I if you'd asked me if virtual reality would ever be a tool to like promote empathy, I would have been like, I don't know, maybe, but usually they're just like looking at a place that it would cost a ton of money to fly to, or, they're taking apart like a cell or something like that. But, one of the universities here in Maine, they are using it in the medical school, and students can put on the headset and experience what it would be like to lose your vision, right? And it's like it's a real scenario, right? Like it's, they've studied it. They found that it helps these people who are about to become doctors develop empathy for a condition in a way that you could never do in the real world, right? Like you can't, I mean, yes, I'm sure you could put a mask on, but like you're not going to create those like slow loss of vision um in any sort of meaningful way like you can with virtual reality. So I also think that while I don't have the answer to how this happens with AI right now, I do think we will find ways to partner with it that are truly more human centered. And I think it's just going to take people being able to advocate for that. It shouldn't just be this tool that does routine things. It should be this thing that becomes deeply integrated in our lives and that people feel like they have the agency to solve the problems that they want to solve or to experience what they want to experience. With that said, I do think the barrier to that right now is like people also need to have agency over their data, right? And how it's used. And so I think there are going to have to be some I think in the corporate space, like how do we agree on what those guardrails are going to be if we're going to let students do this? And it could, like 3D printing or where I didn't worry about data privacy as much, right? But I think using AI, students will inevitably input lots of information. We will use lots of data from people. I think that's a little bit of a different thing. And I think it's going to take more of, it's going to need to be an industry education partnership to get it to the point where there are those guardrails so that students can truly have that autonomy and agency with it.
In our work at UL Research Institutes, we see critical emerging technologies all the time, and we have a standards organization, UL Standards and Engagement. They have to keep up with all these critical emerging technologies to put standards around them that then lead to regulation and code. We have a consensus model. It's taken sometimes 2 years to write a standard. They're all based around agreement at the table. So like the human skills, right? The humaning skills, I call them the harder skills, or some around me call them soft skills. I think they're coming out so quickly right now, and AI being one of those things, that it's really hard to predict even in a year what the newest thing will be. Um, we didn't have any AI that I had ever accessed, and all of a sudden it's in every single program that I get into. There's an AI assistant in every program that I use. So it is really hard to say, but I will say that these critical emerging technologies in this space are, you know, going so quickly that from a safety perspective, we're having a really hard time keeping up with them. And also, we have to figure out where the guardrails are. So in a year from now, I hope that there's some guardrails around this, and I hope there's professional development for educators that is deep, not superficial, around what this is and how it actually will increase information literacy. We can use it uh, for nonfiction text understandings. We can use it for a lot of the things as opposed to just a insert and whatever comes out, then we go with. So I hope, I hope in a year that's what we'll see.
Georgia, I would say something that might be a little controversial because you're asking about the futures. I actually think we won't be talking about AI anymore. It'll just be seamlessly embedded into the tools that we have. That what we're already seeing that. I mean, how many people are using tools in their home that are embedded with AI now and they're not even aware of it? And I think that that's the movement we're going to see in education as well. We already seeing that with and also being screenless. So because large language models can be spoken to, a lot of the tools that are coming to market are all language based. And so we don't have to have screens anymore. A lot of products now have AI seamlessly into them. So an example would be like the garden systems, indoor gardening systems that use AI for STEM in classrooms. They're actually tracking the light, the measurement of the water. They're helping kids really analyze the data of growing plants and agriculture, not just, with the Dixie cups in the room. So we're seeing this seamlessly embedded into the classroom. We're also seeing this in Kai beans with helping with literacy. We have 150,000 of these wands in Florida that are improving literacy rates. So imagine every child having a wand or a pencil that's AI enabled with a camera and that speaks to them, and they can speak to it and ask them questions, anything they're curious about, and they have that with them at all times. That is an incredibly powerful tool. As an educator, it's hard to imagine every kid in my class having that. And then I'll also say in Florida, we have the only virtual reality school in the nation. It's also the fastest growing school in the nation. It went from 120 students to 1,600 in just 2 years. Every student that participates in this full-time school is participating in collaborative classes. So the teachers are teaching in virtual reality, but you are in virtual reality with your classmates. You are in there with them. You are not alone. You have pens you can hand each other. You write on the boards. Teachers can zoom in on individual conversations. And because, especially the growing need for skill building with CTE programs, virtual reality is cheaper than AI. You need less internet than a cell phone, and they cost less than a Chromebook. So we're really thinking that immersion and all kinds of immersion learning are actually in a boom right now. We're seeing finally Lenovo and other product marketers have classroom sets that are easier to use, and the content is getting deeper. And definitely the students are very focused. They're not on their cell phone when they're in a VR headset. And so it's really exciting that the technology is finally catching up with the academics. You got to have both parts. Just because the technology exists doesn't mean we should be using it until the pedagogy is appropriate. So I think the future is going to be more seamless, and maybe we won't even be saying AI in a couple of years. It'll just be built into what we're already using. Hopefully just great teaching is all we'll talk about.
Well, thank you so much for joining this conversation with us today. We've learned some incredible insights, and I'm sure listeners will want the opportunity to reach out if they have questions or to continue the conversation. Where might listeners be able to find you?
They can find us at ulri.org for UL Research Institutes, and can also find me on LinkedIn.
The easiest way is on LinkedIn. Just Jennifer Womble on LinkedIn is really the easiest. I respond there pretty regularly and share a lot of the things I'm researching and thinking about, and would love to engage with everybody in that platform, because then we're build a community and we can all learn from each other.
LinkedIn is the easiest place to find me as well.
Now that we've heard from the experts, it's time to take it to the classroom. This is our Boots on the Ground segment where we talk with real educators doing the real work with AI right alongside their students. Today, it kind of feels like a family episode as our educator guest is our very own Jessica Pack. Jessica, thanks so much for your willingness to switch hats today. But to begin with, can you share with listeners the context in which you work?
Absolutely. I am so excited to be on this side of the metaphorical table this time. My name is Jessica Pack. I am a veteran teacher of 21 years. I've been teaching middle school that long, which is a long time to survive in the land of bad decision making. But I do love those adolescent kiddos. They're hilarious to be around. I am a former California Teacher of the Year and a published education author. My book is called Movie Making in the Classroom, and it's published by ISTE. And my latest foray into all things creativity has been how to leverage AI for instruction in language arts and social studies, and also English language development.
So you are the perfect person to talk about this. So I'm very glad to hear kind of from a granular level what's going on in your classroom. So from that classroom perspective, how is AI changing the way students learn? Not just the accessing information, how they think, problem solve, and construct understanding.
Well, the foundation of my classroom is really universal design for learning. And I think AI makes that more possible in all the different domains of UDL. So, like you mentioned, accessing information, yes, it's easier to make multiple pathways for students to dive into content and have an entry point into the instruction. So in that respect, something like Notebook LM helps us be able to provide alternative means of accessing content for students who maybe need to take a different pathway. But I also think that it's providing the opportunity to become a really critical consumer of the output of AI. And so letting kids design generative AI projects that uses image generation tools, letting them interact with chatbots and have, writing help from a constitutional AI program that they can run. Like, I think those are really good experiences for students to start encountering in middle school. And I think it kind of transforms how they see information itself.
And you and I both love stories and storytelling. So I know it's the end of the day for you, but do you have a moment? Well, any teacher will know the end of the day, the brain, connections are long stretch. Um, but could you share a moment when AI visibly shifted a student's thinking process or they felt some success because of what they were able to do with the help of AI?
Yeah, something that comes to mind right now actually is I'm teaching ancient Rome, and I have a high percentage of students who read below grade level. Current sixth grade students are the last of our sort of COVID gap kids, if you will, in California. Our district was on distance learning for 18 months, and that was all happening during their foundational reading skills. And so a lot of my students right now are high needs readers who are working hard every day to kind of close those skills gaps. And then I have a high number of English language learners and special education students who've been mainstreamed in my classroom also. And so our task with our curriculum was to read an incredibly antiquated primary source about the myth of Romulus and Remus and how the Roman Republic was founded. And I would not term this particular piece of text particularly accessible. The approach I took was to plug it into Adobe Express into chunked sort of slides. And then students really only had to look at one line at a time from the primary source document and really dive into what that particular line was communicating, looking at words that they were unfamiliar with and trying to figure out what does this mean in context. And they did that primarily through prompting AI to generate what they thought the text, that small portion, was talking about. So they started layering generative pieces alongside other sort of stock image and stock graphic or icon pieces they found already in Adobe Express. And in the end, every student had a really clear understanding of what that piece of text was talking about, and they could demonstrate it by having a wholly unique design to each child that they had been able to both generate and combine with other existing resources. So to me, that was a really wonderful thing to see, because this is not text that should be easily accessible to kids, and yet they were able to work their way through it. So that's just something that happened this week. It's always a great moment like that every week in the classroom.
And I love that idea because back in the dark ages, when I started teaching social studies books, it had whatever picture the curriculum writers put in there. So how nice that they're able to kind of customize to their thinking and understanding. That such an awesome path to go down for everyone. And it probably would help me understand this text better too, because I can't imagine reading like ancient Greek texts, even as an adult. Seems like it'd be difficult.
Well, and I think the power of generative images too is that students are having to prompt and then refine their prompts to get the output that they desire. And we know that non-textual representation is a powerful strategy for English language learners and other students who maybe struggle with reading. We've done visual summaries since forever, right? And being able to put an AI spin on that type of strategy is just a really powerful moment.
And as we have taught before, it's one of Marzano's high yield strategies, that non linguistic representation for understanding. So, no matter what kind of student, even gifted students, that is a powerful strategy to use. As AI tools enter the classroom, how do you see the teacher's role evolving? Are we gaining capacity for deeper work with students, or are we being pushed toward new kinds of oversight and management?
That is an excellent question. I definitely think the role of teachers is evolving by necessity. Adobe actually published a really great creativity report in January, February 2025, and it's still, super relevant. But it mentioned that 71% of leaders in the job industry on like LinkedIn are more likely to hire someone who has less experience, but they have AI skills versus a veteran employee who has lots of experience, but they don't have any AI skills. So I think, if the purpose of the institution of education is to prepare young people for their futures, including careers in the job place, it would be remiss if we're not helping them build AI skills. So, with that regard, I really think our job is in a moment of evolution where we're trying to figure out how do we support that type of skill development within a very traditional system. So, I think maybe AI literacy skills and figuring out what types of targeted mini lessons are appropriate for each grade level. What are the resources I want to use to provide those opportunities to my students? Just sort of being able to verify information, understand how a chatbot works, understand the limitations of a chatbot, and how do I sort of, fact check it? And why do I need to fact check? And that leads to a really, great intersection with just informational literacy and being able to locate credible sources that confirm or deny particular pieces of information that you're getting from the chatbot experience. So I really think that the teacher's role as facilitator is becoming more and more clear, that we're not a keeper of content. We really do just have to facilitate the learning experiences happening in the room. And I think it's going to be very difficult for educators who maybe are resistant to AI and kind of want to keep that sort of tight rein of control. I think we're just going to have to evolve as a profession.
And don't you think as well, like even the way that students are assessed, whether it's the classroom, state level, like everything needs to shift, don't you think?
Oh, 100%. It's been really part of the joy of helping co-host this podcast has been just encountering so many different ways of thinking and new ideas out there. And one of our recent guests had mentioned that maybe the starting line for instruction is going to become the product. And then the actual instructional arc is more evaluation and analysis rather than actually generating something. So I think that that's an intriguing line of thought and something that we should consider as we are moving forward.
So just out of curiosity, because we know teachers have like a million jobs a day, has AI freed you from any tasks and has it added any responsibilities as well?
It's definitely freed up a lot of the, like, seek and find type tasks. So, for example, in a universally designed learning environment, usually when you're teaching a concept, it's a good idea to have a textual resource, some type of multimedia resource, maybe an audio resource, and different just modalities kids can tap into. I may have spent an hour or two before in the past surfing YouTube and trying to figure out what other resources are there in my curriculum, and what are all of the, podcast resources I can find on this other website, and then talking to teachers about, just compiling all these resources that we spent so many man and woman hours searching for. And so now I can go someplace like Notebook LM, upload part of my textbook, get an audio source, an explainer video, an infographic, and all of those can be choices for students when they're accessing information. So for me, it's kind of like freed up a lot of those, hunt and peck, seek and find type of activities. Um, I do think that we need to maintain oversight of some things, like, for example, grading and being sort of the final word on student progress and how things are going for students in terms of their improvement. For example, a writing platform that I use quite often that has AI powered feedback kind of tends to classify students as those who are struggling versus those who aren't. But then when I look at the products, I can see growth in students that maybe it just categorized as, typically struggling. And so I think that we still need our professional judgment to be able to break down where kids are at and what they specifically need to succeed. We can't just lean on AI. So in that regard, I think that we're still indispensable.
Oh, no, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. And speaking of that, which human skills feel more essential than ever in an AI-rich learning environment, and how are you intentionally cultivating them with your students?
Well, I think creativity is still a human skill. There's a special element that we bring to what we're creating, and there's ownership over that. So I think that we really process and understand our learning when we're doing something creative with it. And, tool choice is important for that. I gravitate to Adobe Express because I know that it doesn't pre train its image generation models on student work, right? So that's an important ethical consideration from my point of view. And then it also has built-in guardrails. So for me, I intentionally use tools that I know are safe for students, that give them that creative free reign to really create a unique product, something that is only something they could be in charge of. I also think like the human skill of collaboration, which to me includes empathy and being able to have respectful discussions, or being able to have dialogue with someone of the opposite point of view. I think all of those are really important skills, and you only really get that in a collaborative environment. AI can't replace that. So, as much as we like to call AI a thought partner, and I have called it a thought partner for sure for myself and for my students, it really isn't another sentient being, right? So, nothing is going to replace the lived experiences of being human and being able to talk to others about their lived experiences. And then finally, I really think that a skill that is going to be more and more essential is being able to evaluate the output of AI for weaknesses, for areas where it needs evidence to support, it needs maybe, verifying information. All of those skills, I think, can never really be offloaded to anybody. It has to be something that we do as humans. So for me, those are the things that I think that we need to be intentional about providing our students in an AI powered world.
Are you finding are students aware of why these skills matter, or are they starting to become aware of why these human skills matter in this AI world?
I think they're starting to become aware as I introduce the discussion. And usually, whenever we do an AI powered task, the last 5 minutes, the exit ticket really is about the function of AI, the limitations we discovered, how we might use it responsibly. What would be a situation where we wouldn't be using something responsibly? So, for example, we were playing with image generation for the first time. That kind of parlayed into a discussion on deep fakes and how just because you can generate something doesn't mean that it should be used in a public forum or even for you privately because it's crossing ethical lines. So that's the part of the equation that we bring as humans, and students aren't having those conversations often in other areas of their life. When they're on social media, they're consuming AI generated content, but they're not typically listening to peers and thinking themselves about where the lines are and why you might not want to cross them. I also, as a parent myself, I don't think parents are generally equipped to have a ton of different conversations about AI literacy. Sometimes it's like the last thing on your mind when you're just trying to get through the daily grind of parenting and making dinner and going to practice and all those things that consume sort of that parent-child relationship. So what's left is the 8 hours a day students spend in school. And that's really where I think we can start to have those conversations and start to educate other stakeholder groups so that they're well prepared to address it with their students also.
I think that's super important. And hopefully powers that be will listen and know that like these things need to be across, schools, like everywhere. So it's a common conversation. Before we finish up, you had mentioned resistant educators, and you and I both have run into that before. But what is one piece of advice you would give to a resistant educator for starting their journey of trying AI in the classroom? Where would you have them start?
I think I would have them start with maybe removing their own sort of emotion from the concept of AI. I think a lot of times educators, particularly veteran educators who have a wealth of experience and expertise in their subject area, maybe feel a little bit emotional about the idea of AI stepping in and generating content that um, expresses perceived mastery, right? So I think sometimes teachers feel like it's a personal insult if a student uses AI to do an assignment, or maybe they feel a little bit threatened in their own job position or professional capacity by just the concept of AI. And so sometimes that creates sort of an incendiary reaction in the teacher, whether it's in their own heart and mind or just, maybe how they choose to handle something, like always gravitating to an AI detector or something that they think is going to be the silver bullet to stop that AI use. Um, so I guess my first piece of advice is to kind of deal with our own barriers and emotions surrounding AI, and then just recognize that it's not going anywhere. This is a pivotal moment in educational technology and technology in general. And we need to find a way to evolve with the technology as it evolves.
100%. We can't. It's like the people that were still riding horses long after cars were like on the freeways, like this technology is not going to last. They'll come back to this.
I love it. That's such a good analogy.
I'm sure there's some folks that would like to continue this conversation or follow you or be able to reach out. Can you share where listeners could reach you?
Sure, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jessica Pack, that's Pack, and you can find me at Packwoman208 on Instagram, X, Threads, all the things.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of AI and education in the workplace. This podcast series has been brought to you by the Utah STEM Action Center and STEM Connector. If today's conversation sparked ideas, question, or curiosity, we've got more for you. Head on over to our podcast portal for extended learning at aistemcast.com.
You'll find curated resources, classroom-ready tools, and ways to dive deeper into each episode's topic. We're building a community of educators who are ready to explore what's possible with AI, and we would love for you to be a part of it.
Until next time, keep learning, stay curious, and don't be afraid to dive into something new.